A few months ago, Dana White promised us that UFC 300 would be the biggest event ever, containing a super fight we wouldn't believe. It may be the most stacked card I've ever seen from head to toe, but we all know you cannot create the biggest event ever without putting Conor McGregor at the top of the bill. So what went wrong? I'm going to give you guys 3 theories that I think are the most likely out of any, and I'll leave it up to you to decide for yourselves. My first theory is that the UFC is essentially holding Conor hostage. It's no secret that he is dying to fight. Every time you see a camera pointed at him, as of recent, he's practically begging the organization to let him fight. Just take a look at this clip of him in Saudi.
They've never treated anyone. No one's ever been treated. For all the figures we've brought in this game, I sell more than all of them combined, yeah? I sell more than every one of them combined. No one in the history of the fight games ever been treated the way we're getting treated at this minute, yeah? Through what I came through, through what I bring. I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. My patience is wearing thin on me waiting, yeah?
Now you may be asking yourself, why would the UFC want their biggest star not to fight? And that is because of his contract with the organization. Think back to 2021 when Oscar De La Hoya made his return and boxed Vitor Belfort. It was never supposed to be against Vitor. The original opponent was George St. Pierre. The reason GSP did not face him was not because he was scared to box, it was because Dana White refused to let him break his contract with the UFC. The CEO of Triller, Ryan Kavanaugh, took shots at Dana White, stating that it seems like fighters are almost locked into slave contracts. If you're not familiar with how these contracts work, I'll give you a quick breakdown. You sign a contract with the UFC to fight a specified number of fights, usually around 4, and you agree upon how much you will earn to show and how much you will earn to win. Part of this contract states that if you have not fought out all of the specified number of fights on the contract, then you cannot compete in any other organization without permission from the UFC. Conor has commonly expressed that he would love to box again, specifically against Manny Pacquiao. Manny has publicly stated as of this month that he would love to box Conor as well, so why hasn't it taken place? Since his fight with Floyd Mayweather, Conor has started his own promotion, one that Manny has signed to before. Unlike the time Conor boxed Floyd, the UFC would not be a promotional arm in the fight. Therefore, they would not make any money at all. Not only would the UFC not profit from Conor boxing, if he was to box, it is very unlikely he would ever return to the UFC. He would most likely retire or pursue other matches outside the organization. Allowing McGregor to compete in boxing, especially without the UFC's involvement, sets a precedent that could weaken their control over fighters and the company's ability to enforce contracts. By not allowing Conor to fight on this card, they keep him locked into his contract and essentially choose if he ever fights again. Dana says that he doesn't want to fight simply because he has too much money, but LeBron James is 39 and has $1 billion in the bank while looking for another ring. The next reason for why Conor is not fighting on UFC 300 could be because of the lack of value he would bring. When Conor fights, he doesn't need a big event like UFC 300 to sell pay-per-views. Over his past 4 fights in the UFC, Conor has on average, per fight, sold 1.7 million pay-per-views. Put that into perspective, out of the top 5 most selling UFC pay-per-views ever, Conor's last 4 fights take up 4 of those spots. After being gone for less than 2 years, when Conor returned to fight Donald Cerrone on a month's notice, he sold just under 1.4 million pay-per-views. With that, we can reasonably assume that when he returns after a 3-year layoff to fight Mike Chandler, who is a much bigger star than Cerrone, he will definitely sell over 1.5 million pay-per-views. Now, what could we possibly use for reference to determine how many pay-per-views UFC 300 will sell? UFC 200. Back in 2016, the UFC stated that UFC 200 sold 1 million pay-per-views. Since then, the UFC has grown tremendously, and 300 is probably the most stacked card I've ever seen in terms of overall quality. With that, we can gather that it will sell at least 1.3 million pay-per-views. So when Conor returns, he will sell around 1.5, and the UFC 300 will sell around 1.3 million. You might think that it would be smart just to add them together and sell around 3 million, but a large majority of the people who tune into UFC 300 will be the same people that tune into the return of Conor. Let's say 75% of the viewers would be the same people. That would put the combined event at 2.1 million pay-per-view buys. That may be a huge number, but if they separate the events, they could sell upward of 3 million pay-per-view buys in total, generating them $63 million more in total revenue. Even if the numbers are slightly off, even half of that is a tremendous amount to leave on the table. The UFC is a business, and the number one priority of a business is to make money for its shareholders. Third and final theory is that Conor does not want to share his pay-per-view points with anyone else on the card. If you don't know, pay-per-view points are a clause written into contracts stating that if a fighter becomes a champion, they will receive a percentage of the amount of revenue generated from pay-per-view sales. The only exception to this rule is Conor, who will get pay-per-view points regardless if he has a belt or not. In the last 4 events Conor's headlined, there has not been another person with a belt on the card, meaning he's the only one getting pay-per-view points. UFC 300 already has 3 people with belts fighting on it. I'm not 100% sure if the BMF belt includes pay-per-view points, but I'd be willing to bet my money it does. If this were the case, Conor would have to share the pay-per-view points with 3 other fighters, something I highly doubt anyone would want to do. Even if Conor is fine with it, I'm not sure the UFC could afford to give 4 fighters a cut of the pay-per-view. Out of all the theories I presented, this is the one I least likely believe to be true. This is because of Conor's history of being a man of the people. Even though he might lose some money, I think he would tank that loss for the history he could make at UFC 300. When it comes to what I personally believe, I see both of the first two theories being equally likely, especially considering how much of a businessman Dana White has been exposed to be over the past few years. The leaked text messages between him and the Fertittas are a terrible look, and the lawsuit surrounding fighter pay speaks for itself. If I had to choose one, I would probably have to go with the second option, as it seems to be very practical from a business perspective. Why would you choose to leave so much money on the table? Let me know what you guys think. Whatever is going on, it's a shame because I really wanted to see him at 300. But regardless, it still is an incredible card. Drop a like and subscribe. I'll have some more content out soon. Thanks for watching.